Okay. So we'll go ahead and get started. The briefings were sent over to the briefing sites. You should be able to download those there shortly. I'm not sure how long it'll take, but we'll see. It should be in the next few minutes. On an overview, and I'll wait for the slides to catch up on your end. There we go. Some of you will start getting them a little sooner than others. It takes a while to load. We've got a couple loops on here. We've got one radar loop in the far right corner down there. The Irma made landfall in the Keys just east of Key West this morning. There was a report of we did have a wind of 120 miles an hour from a station down in the Keys. We were losing a lot of other sensors as the storm went over, so we don't know. But the radar was estimating winds up in the 120 to 130 mile an hour range, so very much along with what the Hurricane Center is currently is carrying, which is 933 millibars and 130 miles an hour. Again, it's expected to move very close to the Florida coast to the north over the next 24 hours. And you'll see just based on where it is now, if I were to draw in here, it's a little further east. And that may be a little bit of a good news, because if it takes this path that I'm drawing, you can see that's a little bit more over land than if it had taken something like this. And that makes a big difference for us later on down the road, as it'll be a little bit weaker as it comes into Georgia. There is still a little bit of a westerly component to it, but again, we're talking inside the margin of error as it moves north. Nonetheless, the forecast still calls for it to follow somewhere in between these two lines that I just drew over the next 24 hours. We can expect the impacts to begin as early as tonight in far south Georgia, and then that will push all the way into early Tuesday. And then I'll talk about the exit side of this when we get to that slide. In terms of watches and warnings, we did expand the tropical storm warning further north, now way up into northwest Georgia. Now got Rome and Canton across. We left some of the counties in the north and the northeast Georgia, from say Hall County up to Dade County, and you guys northeast of that, we did put you in a tropical storm watch, mostly due to timing and uncertainty in whether you're going to get the sustained winds. We do think that there is a possibility for higher gusts in those higher peaks and the higher elevations. And it is pretty breezy today. That's largely due to the pressure gradient between the high pressure over the Great Lakes and the tropical system coming up from the south. It's a pretty significant pressure gradient. And I think that's going to be our problem moving forward. The winds aren't really going to let up. In fact, we've already seen winds gusting over 40 in Atlanta just from the pressure gradient alone today. So the big impacts here are trees and power lines, with power outages common. And I'll show you some of the opal numbers later when we get to this. It doesn't look like it's going to be as strong as opal, but the wind field is bigger than opals. So the potential for more widespread power lines and trees down and power outages is certainly there. There will be a flash flood threat along the track as well, and you'll see that with the rainfall. And a lot of that's going to come in a pretty short period of time. The further south and west you go, the greater the impacts. In fact, if I show you here the two different colors, southwestern Georgia, which includes Albany, Bainbridge, and Valdosta, which is under the Tallahassee area, that is now a hurricane warning. And so they're expecting potential hurricane force wind conditions down in southwestern Georgia. The area that's actually in green is under a tropical storm warning, but the flash flood watch showed up on top of this when I created the graphic. But that area down Waycross in southeast Georgia is in a tropical storm warning. And then everywhere in red you can see is a tropical storm warning. And then the pink in the far north is a tropical storm watch. Let me erase. Okay, let's on. Here we go. In terms of the track overall, here is yesterday's forecast on the left and today's forecast on the right. You can see not a lot of change. It does look like the storm does move up over Columbus or the Columbus region sometime during the evening tomorrow night. And of course, the conditions will be well out ahead of it and outside of the cone. So just because you see the cone cut off from, say, I-75 and west, does not mean that this area is not going to have a lot of impacts. They will. It's just a matter of the track of the actual center that you're seeing the cone for. So there was a just ever so slight east adjustment. In fact, if you compare the 8 a.m. Monday position in Northeast Florida from today to the 8 a.m. position from yesterday, you can see yesterday it was a major hurricane in that position. Today it's not a major hurricane in that position. So because of the slightly east trend and the fact that it did not get as strong as initially forecast coming through the Keys, I think we had 140 in the forecast yesterday. It got to 130. It is slightly weaker coming into northern Florida. So it is a little bit better, and we'll see that in the wind gusts. Overall, they're down just a tad from what we had last night on this briefing, but overall it's not significant. The impacts are still going to be there because of the duration. So the risk obviously is going to be the wind damage and flooding. Tornadoes, we're a little more confident that tornadoes are not going to be as big of a threat further inland, and I'll explain that when we get to the tornado slide. We think it's going to be more confined to the coast. So let's move on. Tropical storm force wind probabilities, they're down a little bit. Again, that's due to the fact that it's slightly weaker than this time yesterday when we looked at the graphics. Most of North Georgia is in the 20 to 40 percentile of seeing sustained winds of tropical storm force. And then South Georgia, extreme South Georgia is in the 50, South Central Georgia, I'm sorry, extreme South Central Georgia is in the 50 to 70 percentile, and I'm drawing on that. So once you get down far South Georgia, you're above 70% for probability of tropical storm force winds. And again, that will change with time as the storm gets closer. So as it gets closer, the confidence goes up, so does the probability that you'll see the winds. Hurricane force winds, this is a little bit lower than yesterday. Again, you can see the track. If you take the wind probability and follow it up, there's a little bit more land interaction here, even if it's this, than a track that came like this. And so that obviously means a little bit more of a change for these folks here. Again, keep in mind this is sustained wind probability. So it doesn't mean that you won't see gusts up into that range for that part of Georgia. Move on to the next. Time of arrival. I've combined these into the same slide today just for ease. The graphic on your left is the earliest reasonable time. And again, we're seeing gusts today already over 40 in Atlanta. And again, that's largely due to the pressure gradient, but this is associated with the wind field from the storm itself. As early as 2 a.m. in central and south Georgia tonight, by Monday, 8 a.m., probably the I-20 corridor, and then northwest. That would be the earliest, or tomorrow morning. Tomorrow night, or for the most likely time, you're looking at Monday morning in central, south, deep south Georgia, and then expanding to 8 p.m. by the time you get up in the northwest. So extrapolate that, basically late morning in central Georgia and then afternoon in north Georgia is your most likely time of arrival for winds. And so definitely during the day, things start going downhill, and you'll see that in the graphic that I'll show in a minute. So this loop, and I'll let it show, loop a couple times. This is a loop of the model forecast with precipitation. And what I want you to note here is see the center of the storm coming up through Florida. As the storm gets up into Alabama, or Alabama and Tennessee, there's not a lot of precip on the backside, and there's a lot of dry air that's going to get pulled into this. And let's see if I can make this loop stop. There's going to be a lot of dry air that gets pulled into this on this side of the storm. So what you see, this last frame, that is 11 a.m. Tuesday, this last frame that you see on your screen when it stops. There's a lot of dry air that comes in, which means the back edge of this is going to end pretty quickly. And so most of the action is going to occur on the front side of this. And you'll see it coming north. Most of the stuff is north, west, and east of the center, and not very much south. So once it passes, things will start improving pretty rapidly. It'll still be breezy and windy, and it's going to happen in the overnight hours, so it's still going to be dangerous out if there's trees and power lines and whatever else down. But that's good news for at least the come in behind and try to clean up on Tuesday efforts. So we're not expecting one of those big feeder bands to come in and linger. In fact, that looks like it's going to be, oops, let me get back to it. That looks like it's going to be set up more over North Carolina. And you can see at the very end of this frame, there's a large feeder band that's feeding up into North Carolina. That's what we want to try and avoid here, and it looks like we're going to, because we're close enough to the center to get that out. So our impacts are going to come well in advance of the center and with the center itself, and then we'll see things start to improve from the early morning, or the early morning hours Tuesday, say beyond 6 a.m. We'll see things improve from southeast to northwest. So let's go through those max sustained winds. Here is 4 a.m. Monday based on what we have. We're looking at down in south central Georgia, say southeast of Macon from Dublin to Americus. You guys are going to start getting into the sustained tropical storm force winds potentially around that time. And apologize, the scales don't compare from right to left. So don't pay attention to the colors a whole lot. Take a look at the numbers. Couldn't get the numbers to match up. The 9 a.m. Monday, you can see they're starting to get up into the I-20 corridor, or pretty close. But in general, we're looking at 35 to low 40s across most of the area along and south of I-20 for sustained winds. Obviously, it'll be a little gustier, especially with any squalls. We go forward to 3 p.m. Monday. Still looks like 30s to low 40s, and you can see they're coming up a little bit in the south with the center. But with a weaker system, these winds, if you notice from last night to today, aren't as high as they were yesterday on the sustained side. And that also is reflected in the gust side. So we're looking at mid 30s to low 40s across most of the area, and that will take shape by afternoon tomorrow into tomorrow night. So mid 30s to low 40s. You can see 3 p.m. and 8 p.m. on the right. And then I have 2 a.m. Tuesday. Again, don't pay attention to the colors. You can see the numbers. Far western Georgia by 2 a.m. Tuesday. You can see southeastern. If you drew a line from Americus to Macon and then came north to through Athens, you guys are 20 or less by that time by 2 a.m. But closer to the center, it's still in the mid 30s. And then by 8 a.m. Tuesday, the system is well up into northern Alabama or southern Tennessee, and only the far northwestern Georgia we're seeing close to 30. But most everybody else by 8 a.m. Tuesday is in the teens and low 20s for sustained wind. So again, we're expecting this to abate pretty rapidly on the backside of this once it exits to the north. Maximum wind gusts, here is 8 a.m. through 2 p.m. on Monday. Highest winds are going to be in far south Georgia. We're looking at 45 to 55 in the I-20 corridor all the way down to central Georgia, 35 to 45 in the far northwest. 2 p.m. to 8 p.m., 35 to 45 across far north, 45 to 55 in the metro, 55 to 65 in central Georgia. Again, this is going to be the peak wind period, I think, for you guys in central Georgia, Macon over to Columbus and LaGrange, in that 2 p.m. through after 8 p.m. as the center is still relatively strong and approaching from the south. This is when the bands are going to be the heaviest along and just north of the center, as I showed in that model run. So this is your peak wind period, and also getting up into the I-20 corridor as well. Monday, 8 p.m. through 2 a.m., 35 to 45 in far north Georgia, 45 to 55 across most of the state. And again, this is that wind field sort of expanding and contained within the bands. The highest winds, 55 to really 60. There might be some isolated 65, but really when we look at the numbers, it's more 55 range and up to 60 is in west central Georgia, so along and west of 75 and south of 20, and that's going to be closer to the center, which should be moving through Columbus and up into eastern Alabama at this point, sometime after 8 p.m. Tuesday night. And of course, the highest is going to be south central and southwest Georgia. Now, we will see increasing winds across the mountains of the north, with the gusts increasing with the bands around it. So your winds in the mountains will increase. The off the ground, they're a lot higher than what we're seeing at the surface. And you guys that are up elevated are going to see some of those what we call off the ground winds down here. And so you may be on the upper end of this 45 or even potentially pushing 50 in some of the higher elevations. Go to the next slide. Finally, 2 a.m. to 8 a.m. on Tuesday, diminishing overall. You can see just remnants. And again, this is going to be closer to that 2 a.m. time frame down the west side of Georgia, from Columbus up to Trenton and through Carrollton and Rome. That'll be early in this period, and then we'll see them really start to diminish as we trend towards the morning hours into the afternoon. It'll still be breezy and windy, but nothing like what we go through during the overnight and evening hours on Monday. In terms of overall impacts, we did expand this, obviously, with the tropical storm watch and warning expanding inland. We expanded this, and this is also including confidence. Moderate threat in far northeast Georgia. Again, you're furthest from the center. I still think there could be some power outages and trees down. But the moderate and high, we did expand in the I-75, I-20 corridor, extending even far south and further south and west. The highest risk is going to be southwest Georgia, obviously, with the approach of the track. That's where the highest wind speeds are going to be. We would expect a lot more widespread trees and power lines down. Not that it won't happen further north. It will in the I-75 corridor. We are expecting trees and power lines to be an issue. But obviously the greatest impact is going to be near the center itself. Let me erase this and move on. Rainfall, 3 to 5. I think this is the general numbers we've been running the last couple days. Rain mostly between early Monday morning. We are seeing some showers across the south, but Monday morning into Tuesday morning, 3 to 5 across 75 and west, 5 to 7 for you guys in the southeast, Macon, Athens, Augusta, Vidalia. So the far southeast, obviously is going to see the heaviest rain. A lot of that's going to occur with the approach of the center. And as the center goes, so it's going to come pretty quickly, and that's why flash flooding will be a threat, as it is happening fairly quickly along and ahead of the storm itself. So potential for river flooding is there, and again, the River Forecast Center, which is next door to us, is including rainfall forecast in their forecasts. We are not going out with flood warnings as of yet until we get a little bit more confidence. We're getting close to that point, but we are not. So if you go to our river site, which is the graphic you see that's underneath, there won't be any points in flood. But if you go to the Southeast RFC, they are including it. And if you want to see any particular points that are forecast, you can go see. In fact, there are a few points that go into major flood based on the rainfall that is forecast in far southeast Georgia. So that'll be something to watch as well with rainfall amounts we're talking about in as short a period of time that is happening. Tornado risk, and I mentioned this earlier. The tornado risk, the Storm Prediction Center does have a slight risk in far southeast Georgia, and then a marginal risk that comes in. I'll draw on here. It comes into about Augusta to Dublin to maybe Albany or so. It's general area of 16, I-16, maybe definitely south and east of Eatonton. The reason is, if you go outside across North Georgia right now, it's pretty cool and dry. When that rain starts coming in, we're not going to see a lot of instability, which is really one of the key things for tornadoes and tropical systems. And a lot of that's going to be confined to the bands as they're feeding in off the coast down here from the southeast. So we think the tornado threat will be greatest down in the far southeast. Not to say that we can't get something up here. We do think there is a threat, but it's going to be a little bit more isolated than previous thought. And that's, again, largely due to the fact that we're dry and going to be stable as it's raining. In fact, our temps as it's raining and with the storm coming in look like they're going to be in the 60s. So not exactly ideal type conditions for tropical tornadoes, at least from looking at all the things we're looking at. So a little sigh of relief, at least in the north. Again, not that we're not going to not get any. There's still that possibility, but the threat looks like it's a little bit less further north. In terms of comparison to Opal, the graphic you see on the right was the rainfall in the track from Opal. It came up from the south and hit the Panhandle as a Cat 3, I believe, and then dropped some pretty heavy rain across north and northwest Georgia. The areas along and to the right of the track took the biggest hit on that, and again, that's usually the case. Wind-wise, there was a 69-mile-an-hour wind in Marietta, mostly 45 to 60 across the northwestern part of the state. That did drop at least 4,000 to 5,000 trees in the Atlanta metro. There were anywhere from 5,000 to 6,000 power poles knocked down or snapped. And we did have across the state 410,000 people without power at the peak. And there were 8 fatalities due to falling trees. And that's going to be one of our biggest threats, especially since people are going to be, a lot of this is going to happen in the evening, in the overnight hours. People will be sleeping. That's something we'll have to spread the word on, help us spread the word on, is that the falling trees are going to be the biggest threat, in addition to the long duration power outages, et cetera. And then flooding on many areas and rivers and creeks also occurred, especially across northwest Georgia with Opal. So to give you some idea of how it compared with Opal, or what Opal did across the area. So in summary, impacts as early as late tonight, far south and central Georgia, but really it looks like coming in tomorrow is the main period. Strong gusty winds in the bands, well ahead of the main low pressure system. We'll see that start to occur as it's coming ashore in Florida or in the Florida Big Bend. Down trees and power lines and power outages is going to be the main issue, and of course injury or fatalities from falling trees are going to be also a concern as well. Flash flooding is also a possibility. So with that, I'm going to stop the recording and start taking any questions.